Ready? Am I good, Scott? Is this loud enough? Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Or do I need to talk a little bit louder? I think I might need to talk a little bit louder. Scott's playing with the volume here. All right. Well, welcome to tonight's public information meeting regarding the proposed police services facility in the city of Fitchburg. My name is Chad Brecklin, and I'm the Fitchburg City Administrator. I would like to recognize the elected officials that we have with us this evening. Alder Jim Wheeler is standing there. He is our District 4 Alder. I also notice we have at least one member of our Police and Fire Commission here, Tom O'Day, and thank you for everyone else who has come out to this particular public information meeting. I'd also like to thank Dan Cordoso. He's in the back with the hat, and his team here at Doxa Church. They've always been a great partner and a gracious host of their space so that the city can utilize it for meetings and other events such as this here in the Southdale neighborhood. The focus of tonight's public information meeting is on the police services facility project, and that is the first phase of a multi-phase approach that the city is utilizing to address space needs throughout City Hall. There are a number of departments that are housed at City Hall, including the police department. Other departments include engineering, assessing, finance, economic development, pretty much any other city department other than our public safety teams that work out of the fire department and our highway maintenance teams that work out of the highway maintenance facility, and of course our library and our senior center. Can you turn the volume up a little? Nope, can't turn it up. How about I come closer? How's that sound? So, as you may know, Fitchburg has been recently identified as the fastest growing city in the state of Wisconsin. And coming with that growth is a need to add additional staff throughout the city in order to meet the continuing service demands that our community has. The departments within City Hall, as well as the teams associated with those departments, have all grown in recent years, and that has created space needs at City Hall. The current City Hall is at capacity, and in fact, some areas have been over capacity for some time. Planning began to address City Hall space needs all the way back in 2014, when the city hired a consultant to assess its current space needs at that time, as well as its anticipated space needs moving into the future. That consultant created a report with some recommendations, and the mayor at the time also created an ad hoc committee that consisted of citizens, staff members, and elected officials to assess the recommendations that had been made by that consultant and put forward a recommendation to Common Council. The recommendation that's been selected to proceed with has been to create a new home for our police department. By creating a new home for our police department, that allows us to address not only the space needs within the police department as it exists, but also the space needs within City Hall throughout all of the other departments. The other City Hall departments will be able to repurpose and relocate into that vacated space in City Hall that the police department is currently utilizing. So again, just to refocus, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to talk about the first phase of this multi-phase portion of the project, that being specifically the police services facility. This is the fifth public information meeting regarding this portion of the project. I would encourage you, if you have an interest in viewing the previous 4 meetings, to go to the city's website, go to the police department main page, and then you'll find a prominent link there that will take you to a page specifically created for the police services facility, and it has a whole host of information there, also including links to previous meetings that have been held in regards to this project. Tonight's presentation has been organized around the most common questions that the city has received so far. We would like you to hold your questions until the end of the presentation. There will be time provided then for questions. And we also have provided an outline. I think Officer Hinojos has provided outlines to anybody who's walked in. We would encourage you to use those to either make any notes you may have or write down any questions you'd like to ask when we get to that portion of the presentation. And I'd also like to point out that next Tuesday, February 13th at 7:30 p.m., the Fitchburg Common Council will be considering approval of the schematic design of the police services facility, as well as a budget amendment to increase the funding that has been currently allocated in the city budget for the project. You are all, or any members of the public, are welcome to register to speak at that particular meeting, or you may also choose to share your feedback in advance of the meeting by utilizing one of the email addresses that have been provided in the outline. With that, I'd like to thank you all again for coming to tonight's meeting, and I will turn the presentation over to Lieutenant Ned Hartwick of the Fitchburg Police Department. Ned?
Thank you, Chad. I apologize, I have to deal with some odd feedback up here, so I'm going to move around a little bit to escape that. But thank you first and foremost for coming to learn a little bit more about the police facility project. My name is Ned Hartwick. I'm a lieutenant with the Fitchburg Police Department, and I just hit my 15-year mark. My current assignment, I supervise support services, so that includes everything basically that doesn't wear a uniform in the police department, to include our detectives, dispatch, community service officers, crossing guard, court liaison officer, and our social worker, which is a new program to the police department. As our city administrator indicated, we're going to work through this presentation a little differently than we have the past couple of presentations. We've received a lot of very good questions at the presentations and through email. So we're going to work through these questions, and hopefully with this outline you can kind of see where we're moving, hopefully answer your questions as we go through. But if not, we'll have time at the end to cover those questions. So, we kind of talked about this already here as we introduced the presentation. Why do we need a new police facility? City Hall building, which was constructed and occupied in 1999 by multiple city departments, is at capacity. I was just downstairs in the basement of the police facility where we moved 4 of our IT professionals down there out of their office that they previously occupied another floor so that we could accommodate some new positions that have been added. In addition to that growth of City Hall, the city has continued to grow, and those things are interconnected, right? So as the city has grown, we need to add more staff to accommodate the services and needs of the city, and those services that we're providing to the city have evolved. We do business quite a bit different. If you think back even 5 years ago, how society in general was a little bit different, how business was transacted, the city is the same way. So we're going all the way back now 20 years. So not only do we need space now, we need space for the future. And we have been the fastest growing city, and we anticipate that growth is going to continue. So again, going back to 1999, we're talking 25 years ago, we took up shop in City Hall. The police department's located in the lower 2 levels of the City Hall building. In 2014, less than 20 years after the building was really designed to meet the needs, we conducted a space needs analysis. We're going to talk about that in just a second here. And in 2016, that space needs analysis really started to materialize in the budget planning process. So how do we know how much space we're going to need? So the space needs analysis is an analytical study of both space and staffing needs, projecting out to several different horizons, going all the way out to 2035. It looked at the options of adding on to City Hall. It also looked at the standalone option, which is the option that's been selected. The space needs study, I will point out the link that's on your outline. You can obtain the space needs study, review that space needs study on that webpage. So here's the summary of it. Right now, we occupy 17,783 gross square feet of City Hall. That includes non-usable space, so in reality, we have anywhere between 11, around at most 15,000 square feet of usable space. The space needs study moved forward to those different horizons out here, going all the way up to 2035, and based on the growth of the staff and our equipment and everything associated with those things, they projected that we would need 78,000 square feet in a standalone facility. That space needs study identified several immediate space needs, and when we say immediate, those were things that needed to be addressed at that time. That was now almost 10 years ago. Indicated that we needed immediate attention in our evidence storage area, and goes on to further describe the ventilation needs. We share ventilation system with our evidence storage and the rest of the building. So when we have items that we take in as evidence, primarily narcotics, those drugs can be smelled throughout the entire building, all the way up to the third floor. If you come in for a common council meeting after a large drug seizure, that stuff is circulating around the building, and that's not ideal for anyone's health or wellness. It goes on to identify several other things, including armory space, office space, and conference rooms, and then indoor parking, which we'll talk about a little bit more here. Fortunately, we have not been hit with too bad of a winter yet, but we'll talk about how inclement weather impacts our vehicle and our parking capabilities. So projecting into the future here is one of the key components of this facility, but we're going to take a step back and go back to 2010. In 2010, the city was around 25,000 residents. We had 44 sworn personnel, and we were occupying that same 17,000 square feet. Last year, the city, with the addition and attachment of the town of Madison, we hit over 34,000 residents. We have 55 sworn personnel, and we're still in that 17,000 square feet. So, making a couple assumptions here on growth, 750 residents per year. 2033, we're looking at over 40,000 residents. And the estimation here for sworn personnel is based on an ideal staffing level of 1.9 officers per 1,000 residents. Right now, we're one of the lowest for mid-sized cities in the state. We're under around 1.6 officers per 1,000 residents. So if we move up to the desired level of 1.9, we get up to 79 officers. Moving all the way out to 2043, we're going to be nearing 50,000 residents. And that's could be plus or minus. I would anticipate that based on growth. In talking to some experts on this and various factors, it's very conceivable that we could be over 50,000. And so then we'd be looking at around 93 sworn officers. So essentially not quite doubling our sworn staff, but pretty close to that in the next 20 years. So the question that comes up here is, how has the city planned financially for this? We mentioned that going back to 2015, when the space needs study was published, the planning process began financially with the Common Council and the mayor. And so to better explain it, since we're not financial experts, planning experts for the city, we're going to turn to our finance director, who has recorded a message for us here. And it's going to be just a second as we transition.
Hello, my name is Misty Dodge. I'm the finance director here at the City of Fitchburg. We've been getting some recurring questions about the new police services facility that's been proposed, and we're hoping that at least 3 of them we can address with this video. Now, if you have more questions, I included my contact information at the end. Definitely feel free to reach out. The first question I'd like to discuss is, has the city been including this new facility in the financial planning of the city? The answer is yes. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the overall financial processes of the city. In general, it can be split into 3 different stages. So there's planning, appropriation, and spending. On planning, the city has a CIP, or a capital improvement plan. This financial planning tool is used by council in order to plan for those large capital projects. This includes things like roads and facilities and equipment. And it's important to note that this is just a plan. This is not actually directing staff to continue on a project or to start signing contracts. It's just a plan. But it's a great tool for the council to use to know where the city is going with those large dollar amounts. The projects in that adopted CIP then move on to the annual budget or the appropriation stage. This is another public process. At the end, council adopts the annual budget and appropriates the city's funds. And that's how they determine how those funds can be used. The revenue sources in the city's budget includes property taxes, borrowed funds, user fees, aids, etc. And then that money is appropriated by saying how it can be spent on things like city staff, capital costs, debt payments, and other operational costs. Once that project has been budgeted or appropriated, then it moves on to the spending stage. At that point, staff is directed to work on that project, start getting contracts, start getting proposals. But in general, if it's $25,000 or more, council still needs to act on it to give us permission to sign those contracts. So, looking at just the police services facility, that discussion started back in 2014 when there was a space needs analysis done. From a financial planning perspective, it first entered the stage in the mayor's proposed 2016 to 2020 CIP. Now, granted, that project was delayed by the council during that process outside of the CIP, but because it was in that mayor's proposal, it was included in the financial management plan that we presented to council back in June of 2015. The project then moved past the planning stage and into the appropriation stage starting in 2022. And you can see on the screen the different amounts that have been appropriated for this project from 2022 through 2024. And it's been a total of $35 million authorized. Since the funds were appropriated, staff then moved on to the spending stage. There's been a design contract that was authorized by council, and then council will still need to act on the bid, the construction bid when that comes through, and then any changes to that appropriation amount would also need to go through council. So as you can see, this facility has been talked about for many years now, and it's just moving through all of the city's established processes. Another question that we get asked frequently is, could there be better outcomes if the city spent the money planned for this new facility on something else? Ideas we've heard are things like additional staffing, additional pay for existing staffing, or even partnerships with other groups in order to address underlying concerns like poverty, housing, food insecurity, or even job access. While those are definitely worthwhile goals, the short answer is that the money authorized for the facility cannot be used for staffing or partnerships. And the biggest reason is that capital money is different than operating money. So first, capital money, that is items that are identified in the CIP and includes fixed asset purchases or items with a useful life greater than a year. And then there's operating money, which is your day-to-day costs, such as staffing, utilities, etc. The new facility is a capital project that is primarily funded with bonds or 20-year debt. Those bonds are also restricted by statute and can only be spent on certain things. These would include things like facilities or road projects. So this same borrowed money would not be able to be used for operational costs. Another piece to this question is the state-imposed levy limits. Under statute, the council can increase property taxes to repay any amount of the money that is borrowed, principal and interest. However, if the council wanted to increase the operating budget, those costs would need to be absorbed within the levy limits that we are living under. So, no, that borrowed money authorized for this facility cannot be used on operational items like staffing and partnerships. The last question I would like to address in this video are, what are the financial impacts of the proposed new facility? So first, there are two different categories of financial impact for this facility. First is the capital cost. This would include the cost to actually build the facility, and then also the money that we need to pay back, so the debt payments, including principal and interest. On the other side, there's also operational costs for the building, things like a custodian to help maintain and clean the facility, utilities, maintenance, insurance, and then also ongoing capital costs for things like when the HVAC system goes out. So I ran 3 examples for the borrowed money. So for all of these examples, I assumed it would be borrowed over 20 years, that the interest would be 3%, and that it would be an even annual payment. So the total payment each year would be the same for both principal and interest combined. So using those assumptions, I ran these 3 examples. The first example is for $35 million borrowed, which is what is currently authorized or appropriated. That would equate to a $2.4 million debt payment each year. And the impact to property owners would be $51 per year per $100,000 of assessed value, or $195 per year for the average home. In the second example, I used $45 million of borrowed money. Same assumptions, it would be a $3 million debt payment each year, and the impact to the property owners would be $66 per $100,000 of assessed value, or $251 for the average home. And in the last example, I included $49.2 million of borrowed cost. And that's because that's the current estimate of what this facility will require. That would equate to a $3.3 million debt payment, and the impact to property owners would be $73 per year, or $279 for the average home. Flipping to the operating costs, those are assumed to be $551,000 annually, that would equate to an impact of $1 per year per $100,000 of assessed value, or $4 per year on the average home. Now, these statistics are not meant to imply that the financial impact is only borne by the property owners. I do recognize that a lot of times the property tax increases will also pass on to renters, but that is a little harder to quantify. So we really focus on kind of that property owner impact here. I wanted to include some additional resources as well, in case you're interested. The capital improvement plan is available out on the website. The police services facility is on page 167, and it's got all of the history of the project in there. So you can see exactly how it has evolved over the years as a part of the financial planning. Also included are links to the city's budget, the financial management plan that was most recently completed, and then also the city's external audit. The city really cares about being transparent, and all of this information is available for you out on the website. I hope this video helped answer at least some of those questions that have been coming up a lot lately. If you have more, feel free to reach out to me or the project team, including my contact information here. There's also a separate page on the city's website that has the entire history of the police services facility and a lot of different information out there too, if you're interested in learning more. You can also sign up for notifications. There is a separate channel just for this particular project, but you can also sign up for notifications for a lot of different things that are happening at the city. So if you're interested in the city's operations and what we're doing, definitely sign up for those notifications. Thank you for your interest in the city's finances, and I hope you have a great day.
So we covered, Misty covered quite a bit of the background here, but I just have these couple slides up here just to demonstrate the conversation, how the conversation has evolved related to the CIP budget timeline and process here. Don't want to test anyone's vision by any stretch here, but there has been significant conversation at the council level. Delaying the project years, adding spending at different years. And then most recently, the $25 million that was originally allocated was then changed to $35 million, and then an adjustment was made back to $25 million, and then early last year, was back to $35 million. So this conversation has evolved over time. So we've covered the financial planning piece of it. We're going to talk about the timeline related to the actual, within the last year, once this has really picked up some momentum. So as I indicated at the beginning of last year, the budget was $25 million. In April of 23 last year, the Common Council, after a competitive bid process, approved a firm, FGM Architects, to provide architectural and engineering services for the project. And in June, FGM Architects, who I'd mentioned is an expert in designing public safety facilities, police departments. They have, I think, well over 300 projects that they've done around the country. They began working with our team and with city staff to examine the needs of the police department, both current needs and future needs. In July, the Common Council, again, after a competitive bid process, approved Pepper Construction to be the construction management company or firm for this project. They are a technical advisor to assist us when we're evaluating and developing bids in the construction process. In July of last year, the first meeting of the Police Facility Oversight Committee was held. We actually have a couple members, one being Alder Wheeler, and then we have citizen members as well as staff members on that committee. Those committee meetings, including YouTube videos, recordings of them, are available on the webpage that you have the link for the facility. In July of last year, as a result of the evolving capital improvement plan discussion, the $10 million was added back into the project for a total of $35 million. And in December, just a couple months ago, the first project estimate was delivered by Pepper Construction, which is where the $49.2 million amount comes from. We had tentatively been scheduled for Common Council approval of the schematic design in early January. That has now been moved to February. The next phase after schematic design, so schematic design, and if you have a chance to take a look, you can look at some enlarged plans over there. Schematic design is the larger blueprint. Design development is the finer details. And so the next phase would be a public meeting for design development and then Common Council approval of design development. Tentatively, bidding for the project is scheduled to go out in the summer. And in the fall, the council would potentially approve the bids for construction, with the construction process beginning potentially in the fall, with an anticipated completion going into May of 2026. That would then vacate the space in City Hall and allow the second phase that the city administrator indicated of this project to allow other city departments to move into the vacated space. I'll also point out, in addition to the Common Council and the Police Facility Oversight Committee, this project has gone before a number of different committees, including the Board of Public Works, Resource Conservation Committee, Finance, and Planning Commission, or Plan Commission, which is not up there. This is actually the sixth total meeting that we've had. We had a first meeting in November of last year, and earlier in January we had a series of 4 meetings. So where is the facility going to go and why? For those of you that aren't familiar, the City Hall campus is located right off of Lacey Road, at the corner of Lacey and Fish Hatchery Road. And you can see, if you can see the boundary here of the city, the red circle there is where our City Hall Civic Campus is, the library and City Hall. And we'll zoom in here. You can see Fish Hatchery Road and Lacey Road. The library is to the right across Research Park there, and the police proposed facility there would go right on the corner there. So in addition to the strategic location, going back one slide here, being central to the city, and you can see the development to the north and the undeveloped area of the city where expansion for the city and development is expected. In addition to that strategic location, the space, this lot here, was previously considered to be parkland, and through a process which occurred, what month? Last year? That parkland was converted to allow for government or institutional use there. I will point out here, we do have additional city staff here to answer any questions related to the upcoming hearing related to a very minor adjustment to the comprehensive development plan. There is a hearing coming up to discuss moving this from the Conservancy Park status and zoning to, or in the comp plan, to governmental use. So I mentioned in June of last year, we started working with FGM Architects to design the building. One of the common questions that has come up is, why does a police building cost more than a traditional office building? And then, was the design Was it designed to fit the budget or the space? We had we had the space needs of around 78,000 square feet, and then we also had the budget number that we're working with. So building a police facility, it is purpose-built. It is much more than just an office building. There are a number of features within a police department, including additional security features, ballistic protection in walls, secure spaces for detention spaces, a variety of differences between traditional office space and police building. We're also planning for at least 20 years. This building is hopefully going to last much, much longer than that, but we're at least planning to accommodate space needs for 20 years. And it's not terribly feasible to construct half of some of these key areas. It's not easy to expand like it is in an office space. So in terms of a holding cell, an evidence room, or a dispatch center, while we might be able to fill that in only partially, it's much harder to build that infrastructure in a limited capacity and then expand onto it, just because of the core functions of these spaces. And it is more cost efficient to build now for expansion. The only thing that building prices and construction materials will likely do is go up. And so it is more cost efficient to accommodate those future space needs now. When we look at the design and the elements that we want to incorporate in the building, we really took a look at a couple of key documents that are out there that guide a lot of our work in modern policing. Those include President Obama's 21st Century Policing Report, and a report that was done several years ago now by a special task force in Dane County, led by the Dane County United Way, NAACP, Leaders of Color Collaboration, and law enforcement leaders that looked at recommendations to improving policing. So a couple key shared elements in there include officer training, which we'll talk about a little bit more in depth, officer wellness, which is a belief that if we expect officers to take care of the community, that we need to take care of officers. The use of technology is ever evolving. Community engagement is really our core purpose and something that we have tried to make a focus for many years. Enhanced accessibility, and accreditation, which is something that we can move towards, but right now our facility does not allow us to be accredited. Accreditation is a set of standards, a set of best practices that are out there that reduce risk internally and really make for a better police department for the community. Right now, our facility would not meet accreditation standards. So when we work with FGM and when we look at programming and what we need, again, this is a purpose-built space. We have a number of interconnected components, and we have to accommodate for that future growth and flexibility. So you can see just a few of the features of a police department that need to be considered. Our patrol division is our most visible wing, uniformed officers that are out in the community. Investigations that work out of the police department, that's where their home office is. Administration, training, wellness and fitness, a booking area, support services, records, evidence, and dispatch. So again, a lot of these are very unique spaces that have very unique needs that cannot be accounted for in just a common building. We talked a little bit about growth. So what does that growth mean for a police department? It means more sworn personnel. It means more professional staff to support the personnel. It means more record specialists, more dispatchers. It means more vehicles. We have more square miles every day to patrol. We have more officers, more equipment, more calls for service as we add population, more involved investigations, more evidence. So when we have more calls for service, more investigations, that means we have more evidence that we're taking in. We have a greater need for specialized services and an increased need for training and community engagement. A lot of this is mirrored in the area. Fitchburg isn't the only community in Dane County that's growing. So there's going to be more sworn law enforcement personnel in Dane County, more calls for service, more involved investigations that impact Fitchburg. So as I mentioned, I supervise our investigations unit. There are very few investigations, major investigations. We had a shooting incident that occurred late December that was very connected to other communities in our area. And then decreased availability of training facilities, which we'll talk about in depth in a second. So the preferred schematic design, and again, remember this is the larger scale blueprint of the facility, is 74,000 square feet, spread across multiple levels. It incorporates sustainability features, and it does feature training components. So now we're going to zoom in a little bit here and talk about what it looks like inside. I'll talk a little bit more about the site. So we have Fish Hatchery Road, Lacey Road, and Research Park with the main entrance coming off of Research Park. And then the police facility itself is kind of an L shape that sits here with staff parking over here, and then underground parking, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But it occupies this corner that sits right across from the library. This is a rendering of the main entrance. So right now, if you're looking from this side, you'd be on Research Park, and this would be Lacey Road, and Fish Hatchery Road would be behind. Another view from Lacey Road and Research Park. And this is a view from the northwest, so this would be traveling down Fish Hatchery Road. And this is a concern that's come up, is that Fish Hatchery Road is a major thoroughfare for the city. And having essentially a parking lot visible from Fish Hatchery Road. Now, due to elevation and some foliage and the design of the building, we anticipate that the upper levels of the building would be visible, primarily visible, from Fish Hatchery Road, so we don't think that that's a significant issue. Just to orient everyone a little bit here, so this is the sub-level, the main level here, and we'll talk about some of these primary spaces in just a second. And then the upper level is significantly less square footage, occupying just a small portion of the footprint. So in the upper left, and these images combine images from the plan and then other facilities that FGM has worked to construct. So one of the main features, if you've ever been to our police facility, our current space in City Hall, there's a long hallway that sometimes people have trouble navigating and locating, is certainly not welcoming, and we want the space to be welcoming. So the lobby is very open and is able to kind of be a shared space for a variety of reasons. The first point of contact really is the records area here, where people visiting the space would be able to interact with our staff right at that records window. And immediately to the right is the entrance to a multi-purpose room, which we'll talk about here in just a second. The other feature I'll indicate, I mentioned our social worker position. That is also right off the lobby, so individuals that are coming to work with our social worker don't have to walk very far into the police building itself. So immediately off of the lobby is a community multi-purpose room that can accommodate around 80 people with tables, so full classroom style seating. Without tables, they can accommodate quite a few more people. And the purpose of this space is really takes advantage of the multiple purposes, I should say. It can accommodate training, so it can accommodate large scale training, law enforcement training. It can accommodate community events. And it can really accommodate both. With a dividable space here, we can have a law enforcement training on one side, and a community group could reserve the space on the other side. There is a kitchenette that does lend itself to having a lunch or an evening event there for a community or for the police department. We're going to move through a couple of examples of what some of these spaces look like. Social worker office, so we have the potential to have 2 social workers. Right now we have 1 working in our building on a half-time basis. And then a meeting area that could also be used as a soft interview room for crime victims, for meeting with other community stakeholders in that space. Up above here is a depiction of the interview space. So if an individual is coming in to be interviewed as a witness, They would typically be interviewed in the soft interview room. Crime victims, this is a space that is more welcoming and allows us to interact in a way that is much more warm. The hard interview room to the left is a little bit more secure, so this would be if we were interviewing someone that was considered a suspect in a crime and would allow us to transition if we had to take that person into custody as a result of the interview or the investigation. As I mentioned, records is a space right off to the left of the lobby here. We are record specialists, work tirelessly to be the primary point of contact when visitors come to the police department and take the work that's done by officers and to turn that into documentation for court processes and for the public's needs. That space is right off to the left there. Then dispatch lies just to the left of that. We do have 24/7 dispatch operations, which is a unique feature of our police department, provides a better service to the community. And so that's an important space to have with plenty of technology to help handle both building needs and community needs. So patrol, as I mentioned, is the most visible part of the police department that's visible out in the community, but before they start their day and when they are done at the end of the day, there needs to be space for them to complete reports, to work on other projects, and then there's a space to accommodate our supervisory staff, so our sergeants and our lieutenants that are responsible for coaching and mentoring our personnel that are out in the field. And those sergeants and lieutenants need space to plan their workday and manage their daily assignments. We mentioned wellness being a key feature. Right now, our break room consists of a converted coat closet in a hallway. We have a refrigerator, a microwave, and a table that's literally set up in a converted coat closet. So our people, when they're working 8 to 12-hour shift, have no place to take a break. And so it is important for us to have a appropriately sized break room where people can join when they do have their designated break time and decompress, have a meal. Also can host smaller gatherings and celebrations internally. Within that space of the break room is a staff wellness room. We have 3 spaces, which you'll see in just a second, but I just want to highlight the importance of these rooms. They are a multi-purpose wellness room. They can be used as a lactation room. They can be used as a break room. They have a number of purposes. If we have officers that are staying over because they have to appear in court after working night shift and they want to take a nap off duty before they start their court shift or the court appearance, they can do that in these spaces. Again, it's really important for us to be able to take care of all of the officers that are out taking care of the community. We have a number of devices that require charging, including body cameras, tasers, and radios, so those need spaces to be stored and charged. And this is a question that I get repeatedly, the Sally port. When you look at a map, it's a name that sticks out. It's not named after a woman by the name of Sally. It's actually a medieval term that comes from protecting the castle as a way to deploy resources out of a castle out into battle. And so it's a term that stuck around primarily just because of the design and what it does. So right now, if we have someone in our custody and we bring them back to the police department, we have no inside space that we can bring that person into. So if it's icy outside, if it's been snowing or raining, and we have someone that's in our custody and care, and we have to bring them into the police facility, we have to park outside and walk them inside. Now, if someone's in handcuffs and we're walking on an icy surface, the last thing that we want to have happen is for someone to slip and fall and be injured as a result of that. The other concern that we have is if someone were to decide that they were going to run from our custody while they're in handcuffs. So having the Sally Port area, we're able to pull in, park our car, turn the car off, close the garage door behind us, and then safely remove that person from the vehicle and bring them into our holding area. So processing, This is part of our holding area. This is an area where we can fingerprint and photograph individuals. As things have changed within Dane County and at the Dane County Jail, some changes occurred temporarily during the pandemic. There may come a time where we are not taking people to the Dane County Jail anymore, where we bring them to the police department, they're processed, fingerprinted, and photographed, and released with a citation to appear in court later. So we need an adequate space to be able to process individuals, both for arrests and for OWI or drunk driving enforcement. Squad parking, this, as I mentioned, is essentially underground to accommodate our vehicles. I talked a little bit about the weather and those impacts. When I worked night shift many years ago, it was pretty regular that I would walk out to begin my shift at 11 o'clock at night and find that my car had 2 to 3 inches of snow and ice on the windshield. So now I'm trying to respond to an emergency and I have to scrape that snow and ice off the windshield. Not to mention, those vehicles also have quite a few $1,000s worth of computer equipment in there. So if I spent 2 to 3 minutes at minimum scraping that snow and ice off the windshield, then it might take another 15 to 20 minutes for my computer to boot up as I'm trying to respond to an emergency and get information from my computer. So having indoor parking for those vehicles keeps them safe and secure. It also keeps them free from the elements and allows us to immediately get in them and take off. The other feature that's changed recently, we have been able to gain a few more parking spaces indoor in City Hall, is we do have the ability to plug those vehicles in. Now, it doesn't mean that they're a hybrid vehicle, but it allows the electronics in those vehicles to stay powered on so that we don't have to have our vehicles idling. If you ever see a police car idling outside in a parking lot on the side of the street, it's because it takes a long time and a lot of power to boot those things back up, and they can also deplete the battery if that car is not running. Evidence, I talked a little bit about evidence being an immediate space need that was identified back in 2014. Officers, we don't have a full-time evidence technician at the moment, so officers bring evidence back to the police facility. These lockers down here are where an officer would package up evidence, put a piece of evidence into these lockers, and then the other side of the lockers, an evidence technician, part-time evidence technician, would take those out and then put those into evidence storage. Evidence processing has become a bit of a dangerous situation over the last couple of years as we've had a significant increase in fentanyl and other powders. And so when we're handling those controlled substances, it can be a dangerous job that requires the use of these hoods that are several $1,000s of equipment to make sure that we're not subjected or exposed to those powders. Evidence storage, we have a lot of pieces of evidence that we have to store for a very long time, sometimes nearly indefinitely, and so we have to be able to have space. And over the years, as we talk about how things have evolved, there are these space saver systems that allow us to store a lot more evidence in a very small space or a much smaller space than we previously anticipated. So that's something that's been incorporated into this design. We'll talk about a few of the training areas, and we'll talk a little bit more about training, but one of the training spaces here is the Defense and Arrest Tactics training space, which is essentially a large padded room, padded walls and floors to allow us to safely practice defense and arrest tactics in training. Moving into another unique feature that we don't have right now, the investigations major case room. So if we have a significant investigation, a homicide or a shooting, something that requires a lot of resources, having this space allows that team to work exclusively out of there. We had a homicide back in 2019 where we occupied a similar space that's had many purposes. That room had several purposes, but we occupied that space for close to 3 months, and every inch of the walls were filled with pictures, diagrams, information related to the investigation. So that's the purpose of the major case room. And that summarizes a walkthrough of the building. So I mentioned training. This is an area that we've been getting a lot of questions on, and understandably, it's an important topic to talk about. So a couple of the sub-questions were training components previously included in the design? What is the cost estimate of the training bay? And can you generate revenue with the training components? So when we talk about training, I've asked this question: when's the last time that we've seen this headline on the news? Do we see that often? Or do we see images like this when things don't go right? When we're in Uvalde, Texas, standing at a door, dealing with an active shooter situation at a school. We want these news stories. We don't want these news stories. And so we believe that for a variety of reasons, having these training components is the right answer for our situation. We've talked about a tactical training bay with live fire capabilities. It is a way for us to shoot our weapons, what some people would call a range, which I think is kind of a term that has evolved into a training bay like this. It's not a range where it's limited to just shooting a gun. This is a space where we can create this environment, this exact environment. You can use plywood and other materials to recreate a door that could physically be breached while officers are carrying their real equipment. And then this exact scenario could be played out in a space very similar to this. So in addition to being able to fire handguns and rifles in there, we can also fire our less lethal weapons to include munitions that are designed to be less lethal, and our tasers could all safely be done in this space, recreating very realistic training scenarios. So the training components include a multi-purpose training and community room, so the space that we talked about immediately off the lobby. Right now, we struggle to be able to host trainings. We struggle to be able to accommodate large groups for trainings, and so that would allow for 2 simultaneous groups to be in their training or 1 larger group. The defense tactics room we talked about was basically the wrestling space. Looks like a wrestling room with padded walls. And then the multi-purpose tactical training bay. So that space would allow us to conduct our state mandated, we are mandated by the state to qualify in our firearms. It allows for realistic training scenarios. And those realistic training scenarios would be focusing on use of force scenarios and decision making. Also allows for less lethal tools, and it can incorporate environmental elements. So we could actually drive a car into that range and recreate a scenario from a traffic stop, or recreate a scenario where an officer is sitting doing a report and someone may approach them. It may be a confrontation scenario, and then officer has to be able to act appropriately from that scenario. That scenario bay allows us to be as close as real life as possible, carrying our real weapons, and being able to make the choice to not only use that weapon, to be accountable for that weapon. People have asked, can't you use a virtual reality training simulator? Or couldn't you use a gun with paintballs in it? You could, but it's not the same as using the actual tool that you have that has the same feeling, that is what you're going to use in the actual situation. The 2 main questions that have come up with this are what's the cost of this training bay? And that's approximately $2 million for the space, for the shell. It is a larger component. And then additional approximately $2 million to outfit that to be able to accommodate that live fire capability. These components were not previously included in the 2014 study, but we're going to talk about why that has evolved into the need in these next couple slides. So, training challenges. Right now, there are 2 locations in Dane County where we can go and train. One is the Madison Police Department, their training center, which is about 13 years old now. They have the only indoor training facility in the area. And then Dane County, it's only outdoor. So the Dane County facility is shared with the Air National Guard and the Dane County Sheriff's Office. Those are the only 2 locations that we can train at. And the next closest option where we could carry out significant training would be Fort McCoy, which is over 2 hours away. We have to coordinate, as our training is currently set up right now, 20 days of training. And that's 4 in-service training days we'll talk about shortly here for each officer. So it's 20 days that we're trying to get into a schedule. We checked recently with the Madison Training Center, and they're booking at least 6 months out to get into there. They have had an increase in their number of academies that they're running for the Madison Police Department, which they're taking care of first and foremost. And then they have additional trainings and other agencies that are coming in there wanting to use that space as well. Ultimately, when we're going to either one of these locations, it's an inefficient use of time and resources. We have to travel there, so we're paying an officer to be off the road. We're paying an officer to travel there. We're paying an officer to take a break up there and then to travel back. So that's an hour to an hour and a half of just travel time that we're having an officer heading to those training locations, which ultimately ends up shortening their training time. So outside agencies, Madison and the Sheriff's Office are under no obligation. There is no agreement to allow other agencies in Dane County to use those spaces. So the average officer right now is going to the Law Enforcement Academy, the Basic Law Enforcement Academy, for 720 hours of training. I'll point out that that is significantly less than a lot of other licensed professions in the state of Wisconsin. None of those licensed professions carry a gun or have the ability to take away someone's life or liberty if the time is, if that's needed. 20% of that time in the academy is spent, less than 20% is spent on firearms training. I think it's under 60 hours is spent on firearms training. So when we're talking about diversifying our workforce and bringing in non-traditional applicants into law enforcement, people who have never handled a firearm before, and then we're expecting them to become proficient with that tool in 60 hours, that's a very tall ask. So once they come to the police department, they're going to receive 32 hours of in-service training. That's spread among 4 in-service days. 24 hours is the state minimum. They're going to train with their firearm 3 times a year, and they qualify once a year. So really, you're only getting 3 days of training with that firearm. And this is the real reason why we are very interested right now in emphasizing these training components, is that our workforce has gotten younger and younger, and that means less and less experience. Our average officer, patrol officer, has less than 4 years of experience, and if you go and call the police right now in the city of Fitchburg, you're going to have an officer that has probably less than 2 years of experience, definitely under 3. So when we talk about training, there's really 3 components that we're talking about. Theory, which is the classroom training. So if you talk about the classroom space in the upstairs, right off the lobby, an officer could come into our facility and learn the theory. They could learn the why. They could then go into the defense and arrest tactics space and learn the technique. Now, the application of it, which is what our officers do at any given moment, applying all these things together at once in a split second, is the most important part. So they have to know the when, but also the why and the how. That scenario bay is that space that they would be able to do that, put it all together in their actual equipment and gear. So the question has also been posed as to what do these training components do to modify our training design? So up above here, you have our current training model. And these are just examples. It changes from year to year. But you see the biggest component of this is that there's 3 months in between. I don't know of any professional organization, a sports team, any other profession where you might go 3 months between training events and expect proficiency at a moment's notice. Versus having those training components literally underneath us or on the same level in the building, we would anticipate being able to train an officer 4 hours a month in a couple of different formats. Some of that could be on duty, some of that could be for their shift or after their shift. And then on top of it, still keeping those training dates that would allow us to focus more on theory or classroom training. So we'd be more than doubling our training ability and time, having those facilities immediately available to us versus having to schedule the time to travel to Waunakee or to Madison and use their facilities. I mentioned the Dane County United Way report that came out several years ago now, and this is a recommendation, one of their recommendations on training. Essentially says that government entities responsible for funding law enforcement agencies should provide additional funding to train officers, and it covers a variety of topics here. This recommendation is then able to be actualized here through this setup. Right now, because we're competing for space and time, we are very limited in what we're able to accomplish. So, as it relates to the cost of the training bay, it is a significant cost. But what I'd offer as a more significant cost is, number one, a bad situation resulting in the loss of life or injury. And then on top of that too, if we're going to reduce something to financial impacts, we're talking a $3.25 million settlement for an incident that happened in Minnesota where an officer mistook her taser for her firearm and ended up killing an individual who, by all accounts, she intended to tase. That incident resulted in a $3.25 million settlement, but again, more importantly, it resulted in the loss of life. And so if you were to equate the roughly $4 million for the tactical training bay and what that potentially could impact down the road and improve our service, I would offer that as a comparison. The other component to offer when we talk about training, the training elements here, is can this be used as a revenue generator? And I would say that it's not a revenue generator in the sense that we're going to be making money off of it. But right now, we're estimating based on other law enforcement agencies that we would be looking at a cost estimate of around $50,000 a year for operating and maintenance. And then if we look at the potential use of other law enforcement agencies, including Madison College and sworn officers throughout Dane County, we'd be looking at around $60,000 a year. So if you remember, I talked about the average officer, 720 hours at the Law Enforcement Academy, around 32 hours of training a year, less than 4 years of experience. If you had the ability to pick, if you were calling for help, if you had a family member that maybe was experiencing a mental health crisis and for whatever reason had gone armed and caught the attention of someone in your neighborhood and they decided to call the police and an officer responds, would your preference be to be that average officer, the one that has the basic training and the bare minimum, or an officer that has had the ability to train more frequently, more often, and be exposed to more realistic scenarios that we encounter on a daily basis? Switching gears, what sustainability components are included? There's a $2.5 million allowance that was included in this project. We deferred to the Resource Conservation Committee. We are not experts in sustainability. It's an ever-evolving field. And based on recommendations of RCC, they're going to be they show a preference for the geothermal system and some other features to enhance the sustainability features of the building. So it's around $2.5 million that they hope to apply for grants and qualify for some rebates as well. The one aspect that I'll point out here, unlike a lot of other buildings, again, another unique feature of police facilities is that it's a 24-hour facility. We can't save money by turning the lights off or turning the temperature down as easily as you can in a traditional office space. So why has the estimate already exceeded the budget? People have said, you have $35 million, why didn't you design the building to meet the $35 million? So that $35 million amount was based primarily on a study related to the space needs study going back to 2015. And this is a little hard to make out probably in the back. But that 2015 study did not include the $2.5 million for sustainability. It also used conventional mechanical and electrical systems which are not preferred in a police facility due to a variety of reasons. And it also had some differences in technology included in there. And so that accounts for one part of the change there. The other part is the furniture, fixtures, was also, basically everything that goes inside the facility was not included. So if you look back to 2015, just looking at inflation alone, the $23 million, almost $25 million back then, is equivalent to around $37 million today. So going back to a couple of components here, the $2.5 million for sustainability, the $2.8 million for interior furnishings, fixtures, and equipment, and then that $49.2 million number also includes a $5.7 million contingency fee. So that's our fund. So that is almost $11 million right there on top of or subtracted from the 49.2, depending on how you want to look at it. So we're talking inflation, a police-specific design, and additional components and needs accounts for a lot of that difference. So what has been done to address the increased cost? Matt, do you want to talk about the state grant?
So recently, the department has applied for a state grant through the Department of Administration. This state grant has specific purpose for approval for the grant. One of those specific purposes is public safety. And as an element of that grant, the public safety purpose needs to focus on improving overall police services from a regional or statewide impact, and it also can include specific training functions to make it a regional training center. We apply for that grant under the assumption that we were moving these training components into this building to become that regional training center. And thankfully, we've received several letters of support from surrounding agencies, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the ATF, the Wisconsin Police Executive Group, the Wisconsin Chiefs of Police Association, Madison College also provided a letter of support. The Dane County chapter of the NAACP provided a letter of support. Our own insurance company for the city provided a letter of support, all supporting these training functions with the intent that all of them find these training components valuable, and they can be a helpful asset to not only our police department, surrounding law enforcement agencies, to include local, county, state, federal, as well as the community. And it provides us that instant access, or gives us that ability to provide instant access to the community so they can be exposed to providing community-led training. We can have use of force listening sessions. We can have those discussions to build, bring the community members together to build that trust and that understanding, and provide that different perspective that the community can add into our police training. So we're hoping that all of the efforts that we've tried to collectively make as a city, which also included a letter of support from the mayor and some of the alders, that application, which we identified roughly $6.7 million that we requested from the state, hopefully be approved soon, so we can kind of move forward with some of these, to offset some of the costs of these training components.
A couple additional measures that we've taken a look at since this estimate has come out in December is a review of the exterior finishes and other project material. Obviously, we want this building to last and look nice for the community. It's in a very prominent location on the corner there next to the library, so we want it to look nice, but we also want to be mindful of the budget, so we've evaluated that and found some cost savings there. And then we have also looked at adjusting some of the square footage of specific spaces, so not necessarily overall square footage, but making some of the spaces that may have more cost to them a little bit smaller within that design. So potential negative impacts if this process is delayed or significantly modified. Continued cost escalation is a real thing. Working with our construction management company, they're estimating around $200,000 a month for delays to this project as we continue on. One thing that I'm going to talk about here as we close out is efficiencies and how a police facility helps facilitate the work of the police department and the officers. It doesn't come to your house to answer a call for service. It doesn't stop a speeder or investigate a crime, but that facility is the component that helps those people do the work. So we're potential decrease in service level and efficiencies. Most importantly, though, really is the repeat of our current situation. If you remember, we are here because less than 20 years, we determined that we were already running out of space. So we could, in theory, build a building for $35 million, and in probably 5 to 8 years, run out of space and be back here again in the same situation with a more costly solution at that time. No space for new staff, so the city is looking at a staffing plan, a strategy for the next several years, and adding a number of staff members, both in the police department and city hall. There would be no space for them. And increased recruitment and retention issues, which we'll touch on. So what are the benefits to the police department and the community? I've tried a couple of times to really think about how I can distill some of this information down and what a facility, again, recognizing that the facility is not the component that's going to come and address a crime. It's not going to solve an issue on itself, but what it does is it does increase efficiency and flexibility, which then has downstream effects on all of these other components here. So when we talk about quality and competency and proficiency, that all relates to our training. And when you're having an officer or a detective come to your house, assist you as a victim of a crime, you probably, I would hope, expect the best. If you are, for whatever reason, diagnosed with a significant medical condition, people want the best medical care. I don't think this is much different in the sense of you want the best service delivered to you in your time of need. We also talk about development, so being able to develop people, develop our staff. Being prepared, not only for the emergency that we're having now, the emergency that may happen tomorrow, and that growth for the future, and also risk management. We talked a little bit about when we have people in our custody, we're responsible for them. We can't let anything bad happen to them in our custody, and so we need to make sure they're safe, and our staff and visitors are safe as well. But then these things continue downstream to impact things like culture, wellness, recruitment, retention, community engagement, understanding, accountability, accessibility, and all of these things can be directly impacted by a facility that meets our needs both now and in the future. And ultimately, we're talking about increasing service. So we recognize that this has an impact on our taxpayers, on the people that we serve. But ultimately, in return, we would expect that people want a higher level of service for that impact. So just recapping a few things here, talking about return on your investment: enhanced and more efficient service, more capable and competent police force, a space that meets our current needs and our future needs, increased retention. When we talk about why we have the inexperienced and the young staff that we have, it's because we've had a significant amount of turnover in the police department, because it's a challenging field to be in, number one, and working in our community can be challenging for a number of reasons, primarily because of our staffing levels. It's a lot of work that our officers do on a daily basis. Potential savings through reduction in risk and loss, we talked about that. Revenue from training components, again, to help offset the cost, not make a lot of money. An additional space for community. When we try to have community meetings like this, granted we want to be out in our neighborhoods, we can't find community space to have meetings. The library meeting room is frequently booked, city hall, council chambers are frequently booked. This is another amenity for the community. Decreased vehicle idling, we talked about that as an environmental and sustainability component there. And ultimately, just recapping a few of these things here. When we talk about the purpose-built space, city hall growth, safer environment for our staff, for our visitors, and those in our custody or care. And then I really just want to emphasize again, aiding in recruitment and retention efforts. When we go to career fairs, when we are out recruiting current officers trying to come to our community, what sets Fitchburg apart? Most people, when we go to a career fair, don't even know where Fitchburg is. So how do we make a name for ourselves in a positive way? How do we demonstrate that we're committed to our staff, to developing them, to taking people that may not be a traditional law enforcement prospect or applicant, and showing them, demonstrating to them that we're going to invest in them in their personal development. And then, just as importantly, making sure that the people that do work for us, that are committed to the city, that do serve every day, that they are taken care of, that they have a space where that they can be well after they go out and they deal with calls for service, difficult investigation, that they have a space that they can come back and be taken care of and feel like it's a safe and welcoming environment to work in. So next steps. February 13th is the council consideration of the schematic design and the potential budget amendment. And then from there, I mentioned design development. Everyone should have received a document with the outline on there and then the QR code to get to the webpage. This entire presentation, the slide deck, and the recording of it will be posted on that webpage for the facility to include all of the other public meetings that we've had. All documents referenced in here as well will be on there. So with that, I'll turn it back over briefly to the city administrator.
Thank you, Ned. We'll now transition into the question portion of the presentation this evening. So what I'll do is, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and I'll come around with the microphone that way, because the session is being recorded, as Lieutenant Harwick mentioned, so that others who couldn't be here this evening can view and learn more about the project. We need to have the audio capabilities for those that are recording it. So if anybody has questions, again, this would be the opportunity. Feel free to raise your hand and I'll come around and we'll try to get your questions answered. Yes.
I'm curious about the grant. You said it was almost $7 million, and I just wanted to know if that went into the cost that's proposed at $49 million, or if that's offsetting it, or if where would that fit in if the grant was received?
So right now, the grant, the total cost of the building would include that estimate. At the $6.7 million that we requested is essentially the total cost of every one of the training components. So that $6.7 million would get taken off of the total cost of the building.
So effectively making it 42 something.
Roughly.
Okay. And how certain is that grant of being received?
It's not certain.
Okay.
Obviously, it's a competitive grant process, so hopefully we've made enough efforts with our letters of support and our outreach, so hopefully it benefits our efforts.
Can you explain what you mean when you say you can smell narcotics throughout the building due to the HVAC system?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we... Did you repeat the question? Yep. Yeah, the question is being able to smell drugs throughout the building. Yeah, so being able to smell marijuana. So yeah, if we want to get into, yeah. Okay.
What the smell is and the health
Yep.
benefits and the health impact. Smelling marijuana does not cause adverse health impact.
I could cover this.
Yeah.
So one of the things that has been mentioned in regards to this, and again, we can certainly discuss narcotics or not for sure, but what we're talking about here is we have 200 employees throughout the city, and a number of those employees work within City Hall in the second and third floors, finance, engineering, and so forth. So obviously you can imagine that for folks who may not be accustomed to that sort of smell, or for other health reasons would prefer not to smell it, that could be quite distracting and discomforting to other employees within the facility.
So given the current enclosure bag
So right now, marijuana, for example, has to be stored in paper. It can't be stored in plastic, otherwise it becomes moldy and can have some bad effects that way. So that's stored in paper. So it's not something that's a constant, but it's when a large seizure or arrest takes place, and say we had 12 pounds of marijuana that was taken in not too long ago, that can be smelled throughout the entire building for a significant period of time. Ultimately, the goal is no matter what we have in evidence, if we have evidence that has blood on it or things like that, that has biological material on that, best practices is we don't want that circulating throughout the entire building. There should be a separate ventilation system for that evidence that's stored, so that's done safely and does not have health impacts.
You guys follow guidelines that are provided by the crime staff, that's part of the training.
Correct, yes. I mean, we're following best practices for the state crime lab for evidentiary purposes when we're talking about storing evidence, yes.
Hi, I was just curious how many acres of conservation land are going to be destroyed for this, and is there any sort of mitigation efforts to replace those conservation lands? I just got a second question. You mentioned the social worker. You would like to see that, or you'd like to have it be a more inviting place. Then why couldn't the social workers remain in City Hall in the vacated spaces, in a space separate from law enforcement? I feel like that would be much more inviting.
So I don't know if
Yeah, I can take the conservation lands question.
you can introduce yourself here,
Thank you,
TJ.
Chad. I'm Zach Jones. I'm the associate planner for the city. No conservation lands will be taken as part of this development. So there's a portion, I don't know how much trouble it would be to get the site plan back up.
Could you repeat the question? I don't know what.
Yeah, sorry. He asked the first part of his question was how much conservation land will be taken as part of this development. So no conservation land will be taken. It backs up to the Nine Springs Creek, and there's an environmental corridor that runs through the center of this parcel. So the rear edge of the police facility. The police facility will have to stay outside of that area, not counting the small walkway that you see. That's the thin trail that runs to the outside. The rest of the facility right now is designated as environmental corridor by the DNR, but that was done at the city of Fitchburg's designation.
What's the difference between environmental corridor and conservation land?
Sure. The environmental corridor is so there's two different things. Where the stream runs right now is the functional environmental corridor, and then the whole parcel was designated as environmental corridor in the DNR's planning process at the city of Fitchburg's request, because all of this was originally dedicated as parkland. We spoke with the DNR about the possibility of removing it, and they said that they didn't have any formal claim to that land or particular need to designate an environmental corridor outside of the city's comprehensive planning process.
So you're not adding designated parkland anywhere else for this parkland that's being converted?
No, I think Chad can take that.
So this was originally dedicated to the city by a developer as potential use for parkland when the Fitchburg Center campus was originally constructed. The city has not done anything since that land had been dedicated to it and had no plans to convert it to actual usable park space. It had been a site for fill when the library was constructed, so that has never been utilized as park space. As Zach mentioned, the creek that runs through there is part of the Nine Springs Creek, as well as the rest of the parcel to the north and the northwest. Those areas are not going to be developed as part of this particular project. The police facility would stay basically in the southeast corner of this particular parcel, and during the previous process, typically for an ease of designation as it relates to mapping and so forth, oftentimes things follow parcel lines. So that's why you would have maybe seen the entire parcel originally designated as conservancy. The city does have over 700 acres of parks in conservancy currently. That typically grows regularly when the city does have development happen, because as part of our development process, either single-family or multifamily developments are required to dedicate either a certain amount of land in lieu of paying a fee, or they actually have to pay a fee to the city in lieu of designating that parkland, and then the city could utilize that money to build additional amenities in its parks for the community to use, or acquire additional land with that money for park use. So we have mechanisms in place to continue to add to the park system that we do have. And you had a second
I believe
question?
the second part of your question was related to the social worker. Yeah, so one of the reasons of bringing on that social worker into the police department was that they can work more closely with the police officers. That's the number one referral source for that social worker. Right now, she is split between the senior center and the police department. And so having her more closely working with the police department, which is the number one referral source for that, is why that makes sense in that regard. She does go out into the community quite a bit, and that office ultimately ends up being her home base. She has met with a number of crime victims, other people that she's serving within the police department, and so that's why we want to have that position within the police department.
I just feel like, wouldn't it be like more sense to do like social work as an alternative to policing? And then if that's the case, then why would that need to be paired in the same facility?
Yep.
Especially when you have vacated space.
Yeah, I hear your question. The model that we're choosing is to be a kind of a co-response. If she can divert calls and needs to her social work wheelhouse, that's what she does, but sometimes there's overlap there that we've chosen to go with that model. Yeah.
I guess, is there any part of the studies that you guys took into consideration that mentions like ratio of social worker to police officer?
So the social worker position is a pilot position right now. There are it's a growing field right now as it relates to social work and law enforcement. There's several different models. So a lot of them focus on mental health and co-response models with social workers, alternative response models. We are one of the few agencies in Dane County that have the model that we have. And so we're looking at and assessing that with the other needs of the city positions to include not only the police department, but the senior center and all other city departments. So it's something that we're continuing to assess and really see what that caseload looks like for us.
So just remind me, this one social worker that we have, she splits her time kind of, if you will, like a music teacher, half at a middle school, half at high school.
Be a fair comparison, yeah.
So talk to me about the senior center. Why is that somewhere that we're choosing for her to go?
That's where the position originally came from, is she was a senior center social worker, a caseworker with the senior center. That's one of the places where we'd previously providing social work out of the senior center.
Thank you. I've got a series of questions, but in deference to others, I'll just ask 2 or 3 and then maybe 2 follow-ups. Sure. City built a library for a lot less money than this when it went to referendum and let the citizens vote on whether or not they had a say in how much money the city was going to spend. Somewhat surprised that this thing didn't go to a referendum at $40+ million. That's more of somebody can comment if they want. I worry about the cost per supposed $382,000 home. A lot of the housing stock in this city is not houses, it's apartments. What does this do to apartment rents for, that are already tight and pricey in this city when this thing goes on the tax rolls? And this is more of a Chad question maybe, or for Mitzi. What does this do to the debt restraints that the city tries to follow to our capital borrowing as a percentage of the spending in that? And does it screw up the expenditure restraint from the state with the operating costs of $500,000 a year, or $550,000 plus change? And then part of it is training. And I think you ought to train. Not to put the training thing in here, to me, is a huge mistake. You want good people, you want trained people. To even think of not putting it in, to me, is it seems to be a foolhardy kind of a response that you even have to stand up there and defend. But one of the things is you want other cities to come and train in this facility, and I get it because of Dane County and Madison and Madison College, but do you have signed agreements with like any of the other villages, cities, or towns? Rather than bet on that they're going to come, has the police department or the city approached communities and said, You know, if we build this thing, can we count on you, and will you sign an agreement that you're going to do that? So that's round one of questions. Pick whichever one you want.
You can take the first three, Chad.
Read my notes.
So in regards to the question about the referendum, that's certainly a policy call that the city council would make. And at this point in time, they have not elected to utilize the referendum as a means to move this project forward for consideration. Second question was impact on multifamily housing, rental housing. As Misty mentioned in her video, it's much more difficult to equate the impact on a commercial or residential, well, commercial or multifamily property. Those are classified as commercial properties by our assessing department. But generally speaking, I believe, and I'm not an expert in assessing, so I'm going to tread lightly here, you would utilize the same calculation per $1,000 or per $100,000 of assessed value. What that increase is, that would then equate to what the potential increase would be in the property tax in a multifamily housing property. So, but I would, if anybody has any specific questions related to that particular component, I would urge you to use Misty's contact information and reach out to her, because she can explain those nuances much more efficiently than I would be able to do. And then the third question that you had was for me was?
How's it affect the debt limit?
Yes.
Is self-imposed debt limit?
Yes.
Capital expenditure restraint money.
Right. So the city does have financial policies that require it to not exceed certain percentages of its operating budget or overall levy with certain levels of debt. And as was mentioned also in the presentation by our finance director, the city has been planning for this particular project for quite some time. We have vetted the cost associated or estimated cost associated with this particular project with our financial advisors. And they have expressed to us that we are still within the financial policies and best practices that have been established as it relates to debt that the city would be taking on. And as far as the expenditure restraint question, that would be one for Misty. The city always, I'll back up, the expenditure restraint is a state-funded aid that if you keep your budgets within certain levels, you will qualify for additional aid to be provided from the state that can be used for all of our government-related expenses. The city of Fitchburg has historically taken the budgeting position and financial management position that we will do whatever we can to continue to qualify for that particular program. So I'm going to estimate that in our financial planning we are continuing to strive to meet that program, but again, I would defer to Misty for the definitive answer if this would impact that at all. And then you had the agreements question?
So as part of the grant application process, we submitted a letter that was signed on, a letter of interest by at least 15 law enforcement agencies within Dane County. I think there's just over 20 law enforcement agencies, and we've conservatively estimated close to around 500 sworn law enforcement officers and between 450, 500 outside of Dane County Sheriff's Office and the Madison Police Department. That's just within Dane County that could potentially use the facility. In speaking with the Madison Police Department, when they put in their training facility, again, almost 15 years ago now, I believe, it was a kind of a rolling interest as other outside agencies became interested in using that space, and now to the point where you can't book it. And so what we're anticipating is that as that space would be built and start to be used and in circulation, that it become more popular. The most appealing aspect of it is that you would be able to bring a police department or a group of officers there for training for the entire day. They would be able to use the classroom space, the defense arrest tactics space, and the training bay in one space without having to travel, because right now many agencies have to travel from one place to another place to do all of that training outside of the Madison training facility.
And during that application process, we only concentrated on Dane County. It's once we get if we're lucky enough to get the building and the training components, then we can start exploring northern Dane County or northern Rock County, Greene County, those other surrounding counties that we don't have our normal interaction with. just from a consistent law enforcement partner. So the hope is and the plan is to have a much more regional impact than just Dane County.
And what's the projected start date of being able to offer those trainings?
So, I mean, once construction is completed, hopefully in May of 2026, then we can, during that construction process, then we can start really making an effort to advertise that we are going to have this, and I would anticipate it would be in 2026 that it would be available for. That would be prior to your officers being trained, because you mentioned the lack of training. Our officers would come first, obviously, because this is an investment by the city of Fitchburg, so our officers would be coming first. We would set all of our training ahead of any other entity that would want to use it, and then all of those free spaces would then backfill. Very similar to what Madison and Dane County currently do. They schedule all of their officers and their needs first, and they even cancel outside agencies' reservations because something would happen to pop up that they would need their own space. So their needs comes first. Fitchburg's needs would come first from not only law enforcement or police department standpoint, but also from a community standpoint as well.
And that the one thing that is the question has been asked is, could we not go into an agreement on the front end and split that training space among different municipalities on the front end? And what we would lose in that regard is that ability to have that control over the scheduling and that space. If we were to go into an agreement with other organizations, we would potentially lose the ability to be more open and being able to bring in community groups, other entities that aren't law enforcement agencies to see our training, to participate in training and those types of things. So essentially losing some of that control. But again, we would have that schedule down. If no one's scheduled to go in there tonight and we had an officer that's in field training, Officer Hinojos, for example, back there is a field training officer. If he had a trainee that was with him that needed some additional repetitions and something, he would be able to go into that space tonight. As a trainer himself, he would be able to go into that space and work with somebody or potentially a portion of a shift without having to reach out and schedule something weeks in advance.
Okay, I have 3 questions. So I kind of want to continue on the note of so with renters and the concern about the cost of increased property taxes, because we know that those costs will be passed on. I don't think there's any world in which a landlord is going to incur those costs and not pass them on. Is what is the city of Fitchburg doing to address a growing city with a housing market that it cannot likely will not be able to cope without seeing rent increases? What type of investment are they making in affordable housing, whether that's rent supports, whether that's public housing, etc. Second question is, we're talking about increased facility sizes, potentially larger workforces within the facility. And I know that we made a point that this the capital budget can't be used for the operational budget. So how has the city planned for what will likely be an increased operational budget for years to come based on the goal, the quote unquote goal of increasing the staffing? And then lastly, this has been described as an ideal location because it's across from the public library, but my understanding, a public library operates as a third space for people to be outside of work and home, often used by children, families, as well as often homeless people who don't have other places to go during the day. So how has it been considered what other capital expenses and investments could be placed in that location that would be other third spaces that would be more to the benefit of the public library? Because my concern is a little bit you're going to have a place where there's maybe potentially a lot of children going in, a lot of teens. It's going to be right across from a police facility where there could be, has there been protections for whether or not they'll be able to hear the gun range? Or there anything that's going to go on there? There's going to be the Sally Port where you can bring people in, but is there going to be any incidents there, et cetera?
So I could address the questions related to the actual design here and the location. So the range component of it is being designed in such a way using both its location and design so that range can be operated for the rest of the building. So inside the building can continue on its normal functions. So you could have training going on above it, people working in there. So there's not an anticipation that there would be a significant impact related to sound escaping and being noticeable by passersby.
The training bay is essentially buried into the ground. So it is well enclosed from any public view or access for that matter.
And then the other component too is we look at the kind of the prominent feature with the public entrance. The focus on the design is having the east side of the building, which faces the library, to be more public facing, where the community space would be. And then the Sally Port area, the booking or holding area back here on the west side of the building, away from that main kind of corridor right there. The other component I didn't get to touch on, but was addressed in the last, most recent police facility oversight committee meeting, was the landscaping and having landscape design features that would complement this corner right here with Lacey and Research Park, to include spaces for seating, potentially some type of picnic tables and all their outdoor seating amenities that could be out there to increase some community space that's right there on the corner, right across from the library. And then I don't know if you want to tackle the...
Yeah, I'll go and try to tackle the first one in regards to the city's efforts related to affordable housing. So the city has recently closed 2 tax increment financing districts, and as a part of those closings, the state allows us to extend them by 1 year and then utilize excess increment that is generated, i.e. tax revenue, to set that aside to be utilized to either improve housing stock within the community or for affordable housing purposes. And because of the success of those 2 districts, the city has approximately $8 million that has been able to be accumulated that can be utilized to help with affordable housing initiatives. So right now the city is evaluating several different programs and options that could be utilized for that funding, and we anticipate presenting those options to the Common Council this year, and ideally looking to engage in some sort of programs that could help benefit our community as it relates to affordable housing. Another program that we're taking a look at as it relates to affordable housing, those aforementioned tax increment districts, being able to use those to potentially provide additional funding to apartment developers, for instance, that would allow them to create affordable units or more affordable units within those particular projects. Recognizing that oftentimes the financing and equity that it may take to complete these projects oftentimes leads to rents that might not be attainable for many in our community. So there are a number of things that the city is currently looking at, and it would be my estimation that by the end of this year we'll be seeing some programs roll out that will hopefully have a positive impact as it relates to that. So, yes, go ahead.
Could you please expand upon why the council decided not to do a referendum on this matter versus the way they're approaching it, which is a mailer is the first thing I've seen of this?
So I don't know the specific reason. That would be a question for the council to consider. That could be something that perhaps someone may want to speak at the council meeting next week and potentially pose that question. There are, a couple of ways to go about it. One would be to do a referendum for the community. As was mentioned, the library back in, I think, 2012, 2014 was put to referendum. 2 questions were actually put to referendum. One was, do you want a library? And the second question was, do you want to fund the cost to operate said library? And you can imagine that the answer to the first question was, yes, we want a library. And the answer to the second question was, no, we don't want to fund it. So ultimately, at the end of the day, the council was left to make the call on what to do. And I don't know, I don't want to speak for the council, but I don't know if they were potentially considering that as past history and recognizing that they've been elected to make difficult decisions on behalf of their constituents, and therefore have elected to go ahead and make this difficult decision in the best interest of their constituents and the community. So again, they have 2 options available, but at this point in time, they've elected to go with the route that they're heading right now. Did you have the same question? No. Oh, okay.
This one's sort of a follow-up question for you about the affordable housing, and I apologize, I will get to another facility question. My question is, you mentioned closing tax increment finance districts and then using that to incentivize apartment developers as a response to providing lower housing. cost. I'm not sure how that works. I don't know how you're getting any data about that, that it doesn't just incentivize landlords to acquire more capital and not and then pass on the savings again to the renters. My second question is, a lot of this emphasis on this training facilities were in the defense and arrest tactics, and the majority being firearms trainings. Firearms trainings, increasing the amount of time at the range, or sorry, I forget what you call it, whatever you would like to call it. Now, you also said the same thing in the same sort of part of the presentation. You know, would you rather have the average officer or this extremely trained officer to respond to a family having a mental health crisis? I don't really see very much in this presentation about de-escalation training. And my concern would be the emphasis on putting a firearm in the hands of somebody and then wiring a officer's brain into thinking a firearm is their primary de-escalation tool. So is there anything else beyond just defensive tactics and arrest tactics and, killing somebody?
Yep. So when we talk about training, and we get back to the triangle here, we talk about knowing the elements here and talking about the why and the how, but then really the application of it. And when we talk about policy, we talk about legal justification, we talk about all the different elements that go into the theory. The technique is the how, but then that space is where you can apply that. So we can go into a scenario bay, and when we talk about these training days, and when we reserve a range, whether it's Dane County or Madison, and an officer goes to a training session there, they know with a high degree of certainty that at one point they're going to be confronted with a scenario where they are expected to be able to demonstrate their proficiency, practice their skill and technique with a firearm. They know that that's going to happen. Having our own space that we can control and someone can literally go downstairs, we can have them in their gear, everything be prepared mentally, to use the phrase wired, to go in there thinking that that's going to happen. They can go in there and be presented with a scenario where they de-escalate the situation. And they don't deploy any tool other than their verbalization and their de-escalation techniques. So again, we have to train on the technique to have the proficiency, because ultimately we are mandated by the state of Wisconsin to qualify. So you have to be able to use the tool. And the most important tool that you have to be able to use, to your point, is your mind, and then your ability to communicate and de-escalate. In that space, we're able to put all of those things together in a real life scenario that induces stress to the extent that's going to be mirrored out in the street. I can have a conversation with you right now and we can talk through de-escalation. I can teach you the how and the basics behind that, but that does not induce the same level of stress that an officer might encounter. Say we go into that training bay and the lights are turned out and you're clearing a building, and now you're confronted with a scenario where maybe someone is having a mental health crisis and they're armed, so now you have to de-escalate that situation. That can be recreated in there where you put all of those things into practice in that space. That's the one thing that we lack right now to be able to do with any level of consistency.
So the slide following this one has these orange bubbles called community-led trainings, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
How many community-led trainings has the police department hosted this year?
0. We don't have any space to host training.
How many would you expect there to be hosted with this potential facility?
So the option is that depending on what community service providers and community groups want to come in and train, we would open the doors there. This is an example of kind of what that training model could look like, of having those community-led trainings in there, interspersed in between some required trainings and some of those other tactical or technique-based trainings.
So what targets or metrics is the department currently using to evaluate its current community engagement practices?
Related to training specifically?
Related to any of your, however you guys are defining it. If that's, de-escalated calls or diverted cases, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, so we certainly track use of force metrics. We track the number of cases that our social worker have handled. We track the number of cases that require mental health resources, whether that's a transport to an emergency room, as the transport to Winnebago Mental Health Institute, the number of times that we're working with Journey Mental Health, the number of times that we're working sexual violence or rape crisis center. We do track those cases where we're working with community partners, which would probably help us inform which groups that we'd want to be, working with. A lot of those groups do come in though into play here, where we have training with DAYS or with the District Attorney's Office Domestic Violence Unit, trauma-informed care, working with Safe Harbor Child Advocacy Center, those types of community providers that are out there. This would really be able to be space that would not necessarily fall within the traditional law enforcement-based trainings where it's our specific role.
so what I'm kind of hearing is that if there's what could be as minimal as a conference room that was available for your use, then all of these community-led trainings could happen. But the ask is for a training bay, which prioritizes higher levels of use of force, let's say. There seems to be a mismatch in my mind in this regard. It seems to me that the limitation for community engagement within policing is not lack of a training bay. It's community connection. It's a proactive relationship and attitude from the part of the police, and those connections already being kind of invested in. And so I'm curious, what the specific targets for community engagement policing would be if this policing facility existed. How would it change from what we have now?
So one of the core foundational principles of our department since I've been with the city have been related to community policing, neighborhood policing, developing relationships, the basics of policing. We're part of the community. We engage on a daily basis with community members. We're talking about something here that's a little bit more formal, and what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that right now, our training, because it's premised around using these training centers, we have limited time to engage in those 32 hours of training that we're able to spread across the department. With those training spaces involved, we're able to break that up into smaller chunks, which then allows these 4 in-service dates, these 8-hour dates, to be spread out a little bit more. Now we have a space where we can bring people into that community space upstairs in the right off the lobby there. And then potentially too, as the Deputy Chief mentioned, those community groups, organizations can come in and they can experience, we can bring in NAMI, and when we talk about crisis intervention training, they can participate, see the use of force training that we undergo, the scenarios, those types of things. It allows for more collaboration to occur ultimately.
Is Fitchburg currently recruiting from police academies that are using warrior mindset training curriculums?
We recruit anywhere and everywhere. I'm not familiar that we're keeping track of police academies that use what you're referring to as a warrior mindset training. There are trainings out there that refer to that mentality. That's not something, when we talk about culture in our department and why we have our own individual police departments, that's not something that we prioritize or look for when we're recruiting people.
It's not prioritized or deprioritized. Is that accurate?
So the mission of our police department is, we're talking about service and respect, to serve and respect. That is a cultural cornerstone of our department. We're not actively looking for one type of training or another. We're looking for cultural fits for our department. When we recruit and hire individuals, they go through a significant hiring process to include a background investigation and looking at training and other aspects to make sure that they're a good fit for our police department and our community.
Doesn't the state set academy curriculum?
Yeah, the majority of the state law enforcement academies are set, the 720 hours that I referenced are set by the state, in the sense that if you go to an academy in Fox Valley, you're receiving the same basic training that you would receive if you go to Southwest Tech in Fenimore.
Yeah,
No, yeah.
Just a comment with training, because I think we could be selling Fitchburg ourselves short, but at the same time, we could be dismissing a concern that we have in the community regarding to how we train our officers. I think it's important that we have it very clear what type of officer do we want. I don't want Fitchburg training officers in that warrior mentality training. And I think it's important that you guys say that very clearly to the community. No, we don't train our officers that one. We're not going to, but we will train them X, Y, and Z. I also feel that we're emphasizing, I'm for the training center, but I also think that we're emphasizing the space as a way or a need for us to get engaged with the community. And I think we need to be trained in domestic abuse, domestic violence, have agencies like the Rape Crisis Center come in, and we could meet anywhere if we really want to train our officers. Okay, it's important for me to know that the space is not the determinant factor to get the training that the officers need. And I think officers get trained not just in shooting, which is what they do when we go to the range, because you need to be proficient, not only to get the qualifications that are set by the state, but to make sure that you know when and when not to shoot and all those things. So to me, we need to be more clear from you guys the type of officer that we are training, how we're training, and what trainings we're not going to use. Because there are bad trainings out there that we don't want. Another thing I feel it's important is the community should have input and somehow in how we train our officers. So this conversation is very important so that we know what is it that we as citizens expect from our officers as far as training. I mean, I consider a good department, a good community, concerned citizens, intelligent people that could go in and say, hey, I would like you to train your officers on this, and you are receptive to that. Having the space to train is good. It's not necessary all the time, but I'm all for the training facility. I think it would be an excellent thing, but at the same time, I think somehow you guys need to come up with a way of giving the community the ability to have input into training also of those officers.
Yeah, excellent points. I think the community-led training in there is that ability to partner, to find where we're spending our time, where we have deficiencies, where we need to learn more, where a new trend has come in, where we can work with someone to guide that. To your point about going out in the community, it's an excellent point. Going back to something where we talked about when we're having other agencies use the space, we're using the space, we're trying to find efficiencies. So we're trying to be able to get 10 to 15 officers through a number of things of training, a number of components of training, and so having that space where we could not only bring in a local group, or perhaps a national group to come in and host a training where they have minimum size expectations that they're looking for. I think that space helps facilitate it. It's not the only answer. It's not saying that training can happen without that space. But again, just like this building isn't going to go out into the community and handle a call for service, it's going to make the people that go out into the community that do that work better. That's the goal with that space.
So we are at 8:30. Who else has questions? Because we'll try to work, so we have 4 questions remaining. So we'll take these 4. And then obviously staff would still be available after the meeting if anybody has specific questions for any staff members. But obviously in the interest of time for all the folks here. So I'll go ahead and start with you.
So to kind of go off the points that you had mentioned earlier, we were talking a lot about like the involvement of the community, the space that we're thinking that this is going to be used for, and also just 90% of what I've heard tonight is assumptions. I have heard very little guarantee about whether that comes to funding, whether that comes to like community impact, what's actually going to happen. As a service provider in some of these agencies, it's not a matter of you don't have the space to train, it's that we don't want to work with you. We cannot guarantee that if we call one of you, you're actually going to save or help any of our clients. We are more worried about the impact that it has. I have had several instances in which officers have come into the building that I work and refused to talk to us because we required them to like leave their firearm at home. It's not a conversation about like whether or not you have a training space for us to have available. It's a matter of policing. And so when you're thinking about these like community rooms and trying to be like, yeah, we would totally have them open to the like public and they're free of use and everything. I've read through your annual report. The most information you have in there about your community input is that you did 1,000 glow sticks distribution on Halloween. None of what you talked about earlier about your domestic violence, about your de-escalation calls is listed anywhere in there. That's a lack of transparency. Like the issues here are not that you don't have a good enough facility. The issues are not that you don't have enough expensive equipment or expensive training. It's an issue of transparency and the fact that the community does not want to work with you. So why are you expecting the community to front the costs when all you're doing is creating more work for us, because I end up having to counsel people on their negative interactions with police. Like, unless y'all are going to start cutting me a check, don't expect us to pay for this. Like the city of Fitchburg. Who do you work for? I work for Outreach, so we have clients that come in from Fitchburg. So I work with the LGBT plus community, specifically the LGBT plus community and people that use drugs, hence my conversations about the difference between narcotics and marijuana and why it's very important that we don't refer to them in the same thing because they're not the same.
Good question. Is anyone answering?
I took that as a statement. I don't know what the response would be.
I would start off by indicating, as we talked about the training center and the components, we had a number of community partners that authored letters of support and others that have indicated support. There are a variety of resources within Dane County that serve a variety of populations. We're open to working with any of them, and obviously there are feelings from different organizations that have changed over time through our interactions with them. And so the door is open. We don't have the space right now. But we would like to prove the viability of having those partnerships and having that space be able to facilitate those.
And one of the things that you had mentioned as far as the transparency, and I'll kind of go back to Rosa's question as far as making a statement that we don't support, we don't train for warrior officers. We have taken a stance, me being a DAT instructor since 2008, our number one goal in any call for service or any interaction that we have with the public is communication. We have stressed de-escalation, time, distance, and utilizing different resources since 2015 on a constant basis. But communication is the number one tool of every officer, and we have harped on that for years. Officer Hinojos in the back, newer defensive tactics instructor, can attest to that. That is our number one goal in any interaction that we have with the public. We have trained crisis negotiators, we have trained crisis intervention officers, and we understand that there is a variety of situations that people go through in life. We're not blind to that, we're not oblivious to that, and that message starts from the chief all the way down to the newest of officers, that we treat people to serve and respect, and that is incumbent upon every officer on every single call. So I understand that there are trainings out there about this warrior mentality or guardian mentality, but the police officers in the city of Fitchburg, and to the other individuals' comment about transparency, we use physical force, actual hands-on force, during our calls for service in less than 1% of any interactions that we have calls for service. And we have over 25,000 calls for service. So our usage of any kind of force, whether it's physical, verbal, any kind of presence, that use of physical force is at such a low scale, and it's because of the culture and the mentality that we preach throughout our department. So I apologize for people that don't want to work with the Fitchburg Police Department, and hopefully that's a very low number in the community. I think there is a very high number of members in the community that actually do want to work with us and do work with us on a daily basis. But make no mistake, we're not those warrior officers. We are protectors, we are servants to the community. If there is an event that we unfortunately have to use force, we're going to train for that. That's the unfortunate reality of our society and the position that we are in as police officers. And we understand that. But first and foremost, we're people, just like you, and we're going to treat you as such. Go ahead, Hassan.
But I think this is a very good opportunity to set up an outreach, and this lady, I don't know her name. Terry? Terry. Are you guys from outreach? Terry? No, I'm not representing my organization. Oh, okay, but you make a serious statement, and I think it's important to address it, because this is a responsible police department, and we want it to be responsive to the community. So I take, you make a very strong statement, and to just get up now and leave it up in the air, I think it would be irresponsible on our part. And I'm saying it's a good opportunity then for the department and for you, but you're not representing your agency right now. There's someone that can come and speak to that and get together and come up with ways of coming up with a training or some understanding so that we don't have that type of reaction towards our department. So maybe you could talk to your agency and see if someone could reach out to the police department or leave a name or phone number, and they will reach out to you.
Yeah, this is, I feel like this is pretty broad and abstract, but I'm just curious because this like very much feels like a Hail Mary. Like there's so much going into this. There's so much time, energy, money that's going into this. What's the plan if this doesn't go through? And what like time and energy and resources are going into, I think one of the themes of tonight has been like, okay, like there still are spaces where you could meet with community members. Like you may not need this facility to make that possible. So I'm just curious about like what's plan B if this doesn't go through? Because you've expressed a lot of changes that your department wants to see, from training the people that work with you to how you engage the community. But say this isn't entirely necessary. What does going back to the drawing board look like for your department?
Well, there's a variety of things to consider there. I would start off by saying, just backing up a minute, we have been committed in a number of ways to engaging with the community. This isn't a strategy. The building isn't leading the strategy. It's creating the space and the efficiency to improve that engagement and collaboration. We're open to it. Over the years, there have been a number of different partnerships that we've engaged in, and we anticipate continuing to grow those partnerships and build new ones. If this doesn't happen, we talked about a few of the changes that would, negative impacts that might be out there. As far as being out in the community, there's not going to be any change. What is going to happen, though, is that there will continue to be a decrease in the efficiency of service and our ability to deliver service, our ability to meet some of our goals, recruiting and retention, and then ultimately it's going to have an impact on City Hall. It's going to have an impact on the police department until this gets addressed in some capacity. Now, if a significant portion of the facility were to be removed for the budget purposes, I would offer that we would probably be back here in the future in 5 to 10 years having the same conversations about needing more space. We're out of lockers in the men's locker room, for example. There's a number of things that would need to happen that we would have to address in some capacity, and those things would probably get more expensive over time.
Yeah, I can't get past it. I think it was like 8 million was the number that you gave earlier in terms of the city putting resources towards affordable housing initiatives. I just like 8 million, 50 million. I just can't move forward with one and sort of forsake the other. Why not put 50 million into affordable housing or even 25 million into affordable housing.
Yeah, so I can address that. So as the finance director commented during her presentation, this is borrowed money, and we, by law, cannot use borrowed money for those sorts of things. The $8 million that has been identified at this point in time is what's considered to be excess tax increment from these districts that were created for development purposes. So that is the money that we have legally available to us to be able to utilize to put together initiatives related to affordable housing. And then, we recognize that we have a complementary role to our state and local governments, or county as well. There needs to be a partnership amongst all three levels of government to help do combined services to help, whether it be public safety, roadway, parks maintenance, human services, affordable housing initiatives, facilities, whatever the case may be. It's a shared responsibility, and our community is trying to do what we can within the limits that we have available to us, or that we're expected to operate under. So we are certainly making efforts. Is it enough? Probably not. I mean, I can certainly acknowledge that $8 million in if we're talking affordable housing in particular, is a drop in the bucket to the need. I mean, I think anybody in this room who understands the current housing situation that we're in can get a handle on that and recognize that. No, the $8 million, we haven't identified exactly how that's going to be deployed. Could it be deployed in that way? A portion of it? Sure. I mean, that's ultimately up to the city council to determine how it's going to be deployed. But one of the other options we're looking at is how do we create more ownership opportunities at the affordable level, and potentially using some or all of that money to help create ownership opportunities instead of just solely focusing on trying to reduce rent as well, because we also recognize that ownership opportunities are the way to potentially build more generational wealth instead of just having rental options available. So again, I encourage everybody to just kind of stay tuned to this conversation as it works its way through the Common Council process throughout the year to determine what our options are with this money and how it could best be utilized in the community. I think there's some people here who could certainly share some feedback with our Common Council and city staff on how best to potentially utilize that admittedly small bucket of money that has been made available.
Being out of lockers, all right, but as a housing service provider for all of Dane County, I've worked with families of 12, 15, doubled up, and 2 bedrooms in Fitchburg. So I'm talking about weighing priorities.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you after the meeting here to get your contact information. So as we continue to evaluate these programs and initiatives, what's your experience? What do you see works and what do you see doesn't work? Because I think that's going to be valuable as our community considers how best to use that money that's currently available. And again, also for us to continue to seek ways to have more county money and more state money that's also directed towards housing-related initiatives in Fitchburg, or certainly in the Madison metropolitan area as well. You also absolutely may there, Alder Wheeler.
I just want to bring up one point and let everybody know we are not an entitlement community, which means that we don't get direct federal grants or anything like that. And sometimes people look at Madison and say, well, you get all this money. Well, they actually can get that money because they are an entitlement community. And you mentioned housing. We are trying to do something with housing, but you got to remember also, you need an infrastructure to run that. Madison has complete units that run their housing program, their health program, and everything else like that. We don't. We have to count on the county. So, sometimes people go, just take that money and do this and that. We are trying. I mean, $8 million, will it go far? Probably not. Not with land prices right now. They're even talking about affordable housing. And when I hear that, the developers are saying these houses are going to start at like $300,000 and $400,000, because of land prices. But we have been trying. Mike Zimmerman, he's our community economic development person. He has been talking to the Urban League because they have a housing program, Dane County, And like I said, we don't have actually the resources to even run the program. So sometimes we just got to have patience and also look at the difference between Madison and Fitchburg, you know, as far as our ability to get federal grants, because we can't. Oh, do you have a question for me?
Thank you, Alder Wheeler.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, so given that the Common Council's opted out of the referendum, even though the budget has doubled, I wanted to ask about oversight on this project overall. I watched some of the videos. We have it looks like the group in charge is the Police Facility Oversight Committee. I guess those are the people that are intending to look over this expansion here, is that correct? Okay. And I just looked at the list of people on there. It appears to be all police officers or ex-police officers minus maybe one or two people. I don't see any other involvement from the community or other outreach to get people involved. To me, that just feels like a conflict of interest, not pulling in, you know, people maybe with different perspectives or from different parts of the committee. Watching the video, there's a clip from last Thursday where somebody refers to people as not being sophisticated, just kind of a jab at the public, and it felt like maybe not the people that should be looking over something of this magnitude, especially given that there's not a referendum on it. So it just feels somewhat undemocratic, and I just wanted to say that.
So I'll just add to that. In addition to the Oversight Committee, obviously the Common Council has the ultimate authority over this project. They are the policy-making body for the city. They determine ultimately the schematic design for this facility and what will be contained within that facility, and they'll set the budget for said facility as well. And then, of course, it'll be incumbent upon staff to follow the policy direction that is ultimately determined to be set in place by the Common Council. So there, I think, is your ultimate oversight body there through the elected representation of the city council members. And then, of course, anything over $25,000 in increment always has to go, regardless of whether it's tied to a building project or whether, you know, the building inspection department is buying a car so that they can go inspect, you know, new projects or deck repairs and all those sorts of things. All those sorts of things have to go to Common Council for approval. So there are quite a few financial controls in place within the city. So she's been waiting very patiently here. I'll give her the mic.
You mentioned a number of initiatives that would be supported by the new building, such as officer wellness and community engagement, increased training. I'm curious about the buy-in, particularly around training. You mentioned that there is a kind of state-mandated minimum. How are you going to assure that your officers are engaging in that training, are participating in those wellness initiatives? What's that discussion looking like? How's that baked into your culture, and what's the officer buy-in at this time?
So thankfully, our entire department would be required to attend any of those trainings. But thankfully, we do have a culture strong enough to within our officers that they welcome training. That is one of the benefits of how young our department is they are yearning for personal, professional development within our law enforcement. So the things that we can, the ways that we can ensure it is we would be requiring officers to participate in all of these trainings, and we have instructors on staff that would be delivering all of this training, aside from a lot of those community-led outside organizations to come in, but the officers on our department would be required to attend. Regarding officer wellness, we have a very, very strong officer wellness program right now. Our peer support team, we partner with Fitchburg Fire and Fitcherona EMS to create, we've created our Fitchburg Public Safety Wellness Team. We have every department member attend a 1 hour session with a trauma therapist every single year. And we're very focused on our overall officer wellness program within our police department.
So I know that several folks still have questions. We're literally 20 minutes over. You want to take two more? Or would you? Do we have two more here? Was it? We'll take two more, and then if any other questions come up, we encourage you to just come up and talk to us individually so that we can conclude tonight. Go ahead.
I think she had it. Okay. I just want people here to know that this has been open since for a long time. I've said 5, 6 years. It looks like it's even longer than that. And that anyone can go to our council meetings, you can talk. You can talk about things that are not on the agenda as well as are on the agenda. And so if people aren't familiar with Fitchburg, we have a real open and communicative staff. You can call these people, they will answer you. And so as a Fitchburg resident, I say we're doing a darn good job.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I just wanted to say thank you to all the presenters and just asking a lot of hard questions. I don't know to refer to this as a Hail Mary when it's been in the works since 2014. I just feel like this is beneficial to the whole community to have a training center where people can actually encounter those scenarios where it's shoot or don't shoot. What else can there be? How can you develop the confidence not to be afraid to use less lethal tools? So I want to thank you for all the work that you've put into it. I, wish things weren't so expensive, but anybody who's just had a bathroom remodel done knows that things add up really fast in this environment. So thanks to all of you.
Yes, she'll be at the council meeting on the 13th. Yep. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance this evening. If you have any conversational items or questions for us, feel free to come on up. We'll be here for a little bit yet.